This week, the Fox Business Network begins a network-wide look at the nation's debt in a series that we're calling Red Ink Week. With a $2 trillion federal budget deficit and another $30 billion being added to the bill, with today's bankruptcy filing by General Motors, is there a life preserver to pull us out of this sea of debt? All week long, Money for Breakfast is turning to state and cities to see how they are fighting debt and attempting to convince Washington to stop spending. Minnesota's Republican Governor Tim Pawlenty, a known budget hawk facing a $4 billion deficit in his state, joins me right now to discuss those red ink woes. Good morning, Governor. Good to see you.
Good morning, Alexis. Good to see you.
I'm smiling. I want to make us feel good. I want to feel like the recession is over. Here's the problem. We can't keep track of the red ink. We keep talking about billions and billions daily. It's to the point where I think we've all got this big glaze over our eyes because we don't know what it means. How concerned are you about how we're going to pay for all this?
Alexis, I'm very concerned. On the federal level, I think we're going to have the government equivalent of the mortgage crisis in about 10 or 15 years, or maybe even sooner. We are on a path of unsustainability. It is irresponsible. It is reckless. We know that one of the financial laws of gravity is you can't forever live beyond your means and not expect that to come back and bite you. And that's what's going to happen. Fortunately, at the state levels, we have, in most cases, a balanced budget requirement. We get our budgets balanced. It's hard. It's difficult. There's a lot of tension that comes with that, but it must be done and it should be done. The only way to really fix this at the federal level is to get a balanced budget amendment in the Constitution. I don't trust, regardless of who we send to Washington, that they're going to do it.
All right, let's talk about fiscal responsibility in the state first as opposed to the federal government. We'll get into that in just a moment here. But the vast majority, the lion's share of states in this country are facing their own budget deficit gaps in the individual state. Yours is over $4 billion. How do you plan to address that? What do you need to do right away to balance it?
Well, it's a number of things. In Minnesota's case, we're already a highly taxed state. We're trying to make it less so and make it more competitive. So the answer in places like Minnesota shouldn't be to raise taxes, particularly in a recession. So rule number one, don't raise taxes in a recession, or at all, in my view. Number two, live within your means. And that means you got to go after some programs that are sacred cows. In our case, one of the main driving forces, like it is at the federal level, are some of our social service, welfare, and publicly subsidized health care programs. Those are good programs, but they're not so important that they should allow us to go into bankruptcy or to eliminate our ability to fund other important things like schools and colleges and the like. So we're going right after some of those programs, and we're reducing the growth and, in many cases, cutting them in real terms.
Let's explain specifically, Governor, I'm glad you bring that out, how this translates to you and I, because one of the things that everybody talks about is, what does this red ink mean for me? What does this mean for my children at home who want to get that education? How does this translate into an expense that all of us will bear?
Well, one of the things it means is we can't have certain programs growing at an out-of-control rate. And so we have some programs in Minnesota in the social service welfare area that are growing 35% a budget cycle for 2 years. At the same time, we're struggling to find a few percent up or down for our schools. Most people would say that's out of balance. You need to have things in balance. We've got parts of our state budget, just like the federal government, that are growing too fast, way beyond inflation. It needs to be slowed down, and that's what we're zoomed in on. What it means for actual people is we may have to spend a little less in some categories, but that's no different than what's going on in the general population. Most families, most businesses are living on 96 or 97% of what they had a year or two ago, so government has to be scaled back 3 or 4%. And is that hard? Yes, but it's no different than the experience of most Americans, particularly in these economic times.
Let's speak specifically for just a moment about health care. This is a week where Senator Ted Kennedy, as many members of the Senate, will get together and lay out what they believe is a health care plan. The last statistic I saw is that health care spending accounts for 16% of the economy and is expected to double by 2050. Can we afford to reform health care? The expenses associated with this, some say, could be $1.5 trillion while we are addressing one of the deepest recessions in American history.
Alexis, we can't afford to not reform health care, but it has to be done in the correct way with the goal of saving costs, not just expanding access. We also need to improve quality. I'm very concerned that Senator Kennedy's vision and view of national health care reform takes us in the exact wrong direction. We can't continue to have a health care system where everybody gets to go to the doctor, hospital, clinic, or provider, consume goods or services, not know anything about price, not know anything about quality, and send the bill to some other place, namely the government, an insurance company, or an HMO, and expect that system to work. We need to get consumers good information about price and quality and create a market like we have for LASIK eye surgery and the like as a way to control costs and get a market back into it. Senator Kennedy and others are headed in a very different direction, a government-centric form of health care reform. I think that's the exact wrong direction to go and will add costs, not decrease costs. And by the way, that's been the experience in Massachusetts. They were very focused on expanding access, but the cost savings that were promised have not materialized. In fact, the costs have exceeded what they expected and are going up at a concerning level.
Scott Rasmussen, he joins us a lot here on the Fox Business Network, and a Minnesota survey of 500 voters suggested that there's a 7% probability that you would be the next Republican presidential candidate in 2012. In fact, Governor, I don't know if you saw this, but 30% thought it was somewhat likely. Is there a shot that you would consider this?
Alexis, I have my hands full here in Minnesota. And I'm very honored to be the governor of the state of Minnesota. But as I look forward, I don't know what the future holds for me, but I do know for the next year and a half, I'm going to be the governor of Minnesota, and we got a lot of challenges and responsibilities here. I'm worried about my party. I want to do what I can to try to get a party to have some new ideas and some new voices and faces. But beyond that, I'm going to be focused on Minnesota and being governor, at least for the next year and a half.
All right. Governor Tim Pawlenty of Minnesota, terrific having you on the show. Thanks for bringing all this into context for it. We appreciate you having on the show.
Thanks for having me.